Great. So we're going to just get started, and I welcome you all. As most of you know, CHUM is an organization, Capitol Hill United Ministries, that's been around for over 30 years. And it's a consortium of congregations and nonprofit agencies who care about the needs of the community. And about 10 years ago, we started the Women's Homelessness Initiative, which was going every night of the week for 8 years until, yay, COVID came. And we're raising money now, $150,000 to reopen, hopefully in the fall. And we're just about halfway there, which is really exciting for us. This last year, we've done a number of things in the issue of nonviolence, and also with the theme of reclaiming. Many of us, I'm sure most of the people on the screen, have had concern over what has been going on these last years in terms of the use of words, the use of concepts. We're here to have conversation around the issues of science, reclaiming patriotism, reclaiming the issue of faith, freedom, language. And today it's reclaiming conversations about race. And we're so happy to have Adrian with us, Juanita, and and Timothy's not with us yet, is he? No. Timothy's not with us yet. So I'm looking forward to a really good conversation, a lot of honesty and trust on the issue of race. I'd like to start with a little reflection. And this is something I wrote, and Adrian had heard it before, but I wrote it a year ago. This is the anniversary. Hello, Timothy, nice to see you. A year ago with George Floyd's murder. So if you could just take a few breaths, seriously deep breaths. And this is called the lamentation of my heart. I cannot breathe. Words that drain the breath out of my soul as breath was drained from the life of George Floyd and many others. I cannot breathe when I feel the grief of our brothers and sisters as they live and die with continued injustice, inequality. I cannot breathe when I see some of those who were called to protect and serve and lives by using unauthorized force, fueled by their own disdain and fear. I cannot breathe when I walk through our city and see the destruction caused by frustration, violence, and rage. I cannot breathe when the message of pain and change is overshadowed by those who choose to inflame. I cannot breathe when I feel a sense of impotence with my own white privilege. We together need to breathe new life into our lifeless body politic. We need to be willing to breathe in fresh air to fill our hearts with the courage to tell the truth. This truth may open up space in our lungs, in our country for deeper breathing, to help us find the courage to love, to transform, to heal, to freedom. So thank you, my brothers and sisters, for being together today. I am thrilled to have Adrian with us, a friend, a man of the law, most times, a writer, a man who is a community leader, a man of faith, a man of food. And we're so proud of the work you've done and happy for you to talk about what you've done with your next book. So take it away, Mr. Miller.
Well, thank you, Deanna. It's so good to be with all of you. See so many friendly faces, so many people I know. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spend a little time talking about my latest book, Black Smoke, African Americans in the United States of Barbecue. So if you're wondering, I love that title. But if you're wondering how I got that, years ago when they were, deciding the most recent pope, I was watching CNN. They say, okay, so when we see that white smoke come out of the chimney, that's when they've made their decision. I thought, black smoke. So that's where I came up with the title. So I'm going to share my screen and just do a very quick presentation that kind of sets the table for what I talk about in the book. All right. So this is me at one of my favorite barbecue joints. As you can tell, I'm very impressed with the food. This was Boney's Smokehouse, which sadly has closed. The pandemic just did a number on them. So that was one of my favorite Black-owned places in Denver. And now there are few left. In Denver proper, there's really only one Black-owned barbecue. Well, actually, there's two now. One just opened, but not as many as there were in years prior. And so this book is really a celebration of African-American barbecue culture and also a restoration of African Americans to the barbecue narrative, because unfortunately, in recent years, African Americans have been pushed to the sidelines when it comes to barbecue storytelling. In fact, you watch some shows, you wouldn't even know that Black people barbecue. So let's talk about that. You're always encouraged to do social media whenever I talk. I'm on most platforms. I'm Soul Food Scholar. So yeah, if you want to show a brother some love, please do, tag me at Soul Food Scholar. Unless you have something critical to say, something negative, you can just hold on to that. There's really no reason to share that. As Diana mentioned earlier, I've written a couple of books. So I wrote a book on the history of soul food that won the James Beard Award, and a history of Black chefs in the White House. So it was really in the research for my soul food book that I decided to write about barbecue, because so many soul food joints have barbecue on the menu. Even if it's baked, they'll say they have a barbecued whatever. And then so many Black-owned barbecue restaurants have soul food side dishes. So I thought there was so much congruence there that I needed to include barbecue in my soul food book. But after learning more about barbecue, I really think it's its own thing. That led to this book, Black Smoke, African Americans in the United States of Barbecue, it was published April 27th. So it's almost a month old. And it's selling really well. It's been #1 in a few Amazon categories, and has been featured in a lot of newspapers. Today it was in the New York Times and the Washington Post. So it's getting great coverage. Already going into a third printing. So that's really cool news. All right. So how did all this start? Well, in 2004, I was watching the Food Network and I saw a commercial for something called Paula's Southern Barbecue. And I knew that I was eventually going to write a book on barbecue. So I thought, well, let me watch this hour-long special, because I'll just find out who the latest personalities on barbecue, kind of current trends, that kind of thing. So I'm watching the show, and then an hour later, when the credits are rolling, my mouth is agape because no African Americans were featured in that show. The closest we got is the sign of an African American restaurant in Austin called Stubbs, Black-owned restaurant. But other than that, no African Americans. So I thought, well, first, how does this even happen in the year 2004? And then secondly, I thought, well, maybe I got it twisted. Maybe it was Paula Deen's Scandinavian barbecue, sponsored by Alabama white sauce. So I thought, well, maybe I just got it twisted. So I started to delve more deeply into barbecue history. And so we're going to pay attention to this. This is from Harper's Weekly, November 9th, 1895. This is a scene from the Atlanta Exposition, it was called. And one of the big attractions at that was a genuine Southern barbecue. So we're going to zoom in here and spend a little time on this image. So for 200 years, this is what barbecue was. It was cooking whole animals over a trench filled with hardwood coals. And then whole animals the carcasses were butterflied, and then poles were stuck in the side so that they could be periodically flipped for even cooking. And African Americans did that work. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why African Americans are tied to barbecue. But this is the way barbecue was experienced for most people. So right above them, you've got this white dude with the top hat who's kind of pointing there. So he would be called, we call that person the pit master today, but back then they were called barbecue superintendents. And so he's the guy that got all the credit for the barbecue, even though the Black people were doing all the work. And that's a similar dynamic. Now, if we go to the left or to the right here, you can see there's an African-American guy with a shovel, and in that shovel are some burning coals. So typically there was a separate fire that was maintained, and then the coals were replenished periodically to make sure that there was even cooking. And then if you go further right, you've got a group of white spectators beholding the whole scene, right? Because barbecue done this way is a spectacle. And so there was a lot of instances where white people would just gather at the perimeter of a barbecue and just behold the whole thing. Now let's go up to the top of the image. You'll see there's an African American guy with two big pots. So he is making something called Brunswick stew. And if you're from Georgia, you'll be familiar with it. This is a chicken and vegetable stew that was often served with barbecue. It's the descendant of a hunter stew. So in the earliest days, it was made with squirrel and some other things, but now chicken. And so this is what barbecue was. All right, now fast forward to 2003, where we get to this gourmet Bon Appetit magazine had this special on who's who in American barbecue. And we're going to zoom in on this as well. So this was a depiction of the leading voices in barbecue. So if you remember Where's Waldo, this is worse than Where's Waldo, because at least in the Waldo images, Waldo was there, right? So I want you to spend a moment and try to find the brother or the sister who makes barbecue. And because I'll have limited time, I'm not going to torture you too much. You're not going to find them. In the middle, we've got an Asian American with the beach ball. And then we've got a woman. If you go to his left, you got a woman. But everybody else is in this picture is a white dude. So the question is, how do we go from that 1895 image to the 2003 image? And what I argue is that Blackness and barbecue were wedded by the time we get to the 19th century. So barbecue was, again, going in some rural setting, digging that trench, filling it up with chopping the wood, burning it down, filling up that trench, cooking the animals. It was a big production. And so the racial dynamics of the time in the American South is if you're going to have anybody do hard work and not compensate them, you made enslaved African Americans do that work. So much so, by the time we get to the 19th century, it's impossible to think of barbecue without African Americans involved. In fact, it was a Black experience from beginning to end because African Americans did all of the pre-production work, and then they did all of the cooking and the serving. And then even after all that was done, African Americans were tasked to entertain the white guests by doing cakewalks, singing plantation melodies, spirituals, all of that stuff. So it was a Black experience from start to finish. So here's a newspaper article from 1839. This is a Maine newspaper. So this is a writer in Bangor, Maine, who is trying to educate his readers on what a true Southern barbecue is. And so what he decided to do was reach out to his Virginian friend to explain what barbecue is. And if we go to the third sentence here, on the previous day, previous day of the barbecue taking place, some favorite Negro man of reputation for skill and experience in the business is set up with his assistants who proceed to make a kiln or pit of stones. So what this is telling you is that African Americans are, having an African American man, and some articles would talk about a colored man, that was the terminology used then, was essential to having good barbecue. And this article is not in isolation. There are articles all over the place in the 1800s that essentially say the same things, making actually African Americans part of the barbecue process and recipe description. So by the time that you get to the latter part of the 1800s, the 19th century, African Americans are widely considered barbecue's go-to cooks. They are the ones that are, a lot of people are making barbecue by the time you get to the 1900. A lot more white men are involved, but Black people are considered the ones that make the best barbecue. And they actually are considered barbecue ambassadors. After emancipation, people who hankered for a taste of Southern barbecue all across the country would basically recruit African Americans, put them on trains, boats, stagecoaches, whatever, to bring them to their community to replicate a Southern barbecue. Now, a lot of times these were cameo appearances. The African American cooks would stay and then they would leave. But there were many instances where African Americans stayed in that community and they kickstarted that community's commercial barbecue scene. So the question is, what's the problem now? And what I argue in my book is that food media has fallen deeply, softly, tenderly, maddeningly in love with white dudes who barbecue. And I argue there are 4 archetypal white dudes who barbecue. So moving from left to right, this shows Barbecue Pitmasters, which was hugely influential on the barbecue scene today. You've got Tuffy Stone, who is a decorated competition guy, world champion. That's one type. Then you've got Myron Mixon, who's a hybrid because he's a decorated barbecue competitor as well, but he represents the Bubba type, right? The working class, rural white guy. And then you've got the hipster type, you know, white dudes with interesting facial hair, glasses, tattoos. And then over to the far right, you've got Bobby Flay, who is what I call a toke who smokes. So these are fine dining chefs who are in the barbecue game in a way they never were before. And so the reason why these men emerge is because food media conferred them authority in order to inform this group, foodies. So my main argument is the reason why we're in this present state, at least in terms of media representation of African Americans, is because in the late 80s, early 90s, there's this group called foodies. I'm one of them who emerge. These are the people who take pictures of their food. They're doing all their social media based on food, that kind of thing. They have a more diverse palate than their parents' generation. They're intensely curious about food. They've got some disposable income, so they're willing to travel for food. And at the same time that they are amassing as a group, barbecue is becoming immensely popular. And foodies are asking two questions: what's barbecue, and where do I get the good stuff? And there's a commensurate rise in media to cater to this group of foodies. And that, unfortunately, food media group is either not diverse itself or not interested in diversity. So at the very time that foodies are looking for experts, the ones that are put in front of them are white dude after white dude after white dude. So this accelerates during the 90s and explains why 2003 we get a depiction like that from Bon Appetit magazine. It explains why in 2004 the Food Network would air a show with no black people, a show about Southern barbecue with no black people. Why Fox News, when in 2015 said, here are all the most influential pitmasters in the United States, an all white list. And why the Barbecue Hall of Fame, which had 30 inductees by the time I was paying attention, only had one African American inductee. So there's a conventional wisdom. Remember, I was talking about barbecue as whole animal cooking over a trench, periodically sauced throughout the process. So now here's the emerging conventional barbecue wisdom. So one is that it's low and slow cooking. So cooking something over a long period of time at a low temperature, which is one way to cook barbecue. But I know quite a few African Americans who cook hot, fast, then slow. The other one is using lesser cuts of meat. Now, that really doesn't happen until the turn of the 20th century, when barbecue moves from a rural context to an urban context. So in the rural context, barbecue is what I showed you earlier, right? Cooking those whole animals over a trench. In an urban context, that's not so easily done. So what people did is they started transitioning to smaller cuts: spare ribs, pork shoulder, sausages, brisket, all of those things, right? And so with that move to urban barbecue and these lesser cuts of meat, then you get a barbecue innovation period where all of these regional styles start to take shape. So a lot of the regional styles that we fight about today, they're only about a century old. If you want to talk about barbecue's long history, it's the whole animal cooking. There's also a feeling that barbecue should be minimally seasoned, just salt and pepper. That's a reflection of fine dining chefs getting in the barbecue game, right? That's their sensibility, subtlety and seasoning. You should really taste the meat. And then the one that really gets on my nerves is this idea that legitimate barbecue should not be sauced. And, not universally, but I can tell you there's a lot of African Americans, when they hear that barbecue should be unsauced, their response is, says who? I've been to a lot of restaurants where barbecue sauce is the calling card of that restaurant. I've been to places where you order your barbecue and you get an ocean of sauce with little islands of meat poking through the sauce. And so, it's fine if you don't like sauce with your barbecue. What irks me is when people say a legitimate barbecue should be unsauced. This is erasing Black contributions in the Black barbecue aesthetic. So just to sum up my message, my book is a celebration of African American barbecue culture, and it's also a restoration of African Americans to the center of barbecue's narrative. And at first, when I wrote this book, I thought that I was going to be writing an elegy, about the slow death of Black barbecue. But I'm excited because what I found is that barbecue is shifting. You may not have as many brick and mortar locations as we had in the past, but people are on the roadside, in parking lots, in churches, other places, still doing their thing. So I'm just excited about the way that barbecue has transitioned. So thank you for your time. That's my short presentation on my book. And so yours in smoke and sauce. That's how I always autograph my books. You're still muted.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I will remind myself to not be sauceless when I'm with you.
There you go.
Does anyone have any questions? I really appreciate, I mean, I just learned a whole bunch of stuff I had no idea about. So does anyone have any questions for Adrian? And Adrian, when are you cooking for us? Which is what everybody asks.
Yeah, if you like cornflakes, I can cook for you anytime.
Have you ever thought about opening up a place or no?
I did think about it 20 years ago. I wanted to open up a place in Five Points, but now that I know more about restaurant culture, that's a lot of work, yo. So I could see myself associated with the restaurant and be the creative force, like an advisor on the menu and other stuff. But day in and day out restaurant life, nah,
Mhm.
I'm not feeling that anymore.
So is your book what's the best way to get your book?
You can go to my website, soulfoodscholar.com, and there's a shop option, and then you can click on and order my book, and I'll send it to you autographed. And I'm happy to autograph it any way you want. So if you want me to say, write down, I couldn't have written this without you, I'm happy to do that. And it's available on online sellers, so Barnes and Noble, Amazon. That helps me as an author if you actually buy it there as well. And tattered cover it's on back order because it's been selling so well. So there are more book copies coming to Tattered Cover and Book Bar locally. And then if not, ask your library to carry it because library sales help as well.
Mhm. Have you thought of doing it through any of the churches?
No, I haven't.
That's how we sold our book.
Okay, there you go.
You've sold many more than we have.
Now that's a good idea.
Yeah.
But in fact, you all should know that if I had more time, I would have gone into this, but I actually have a whole chapter on church barbecue. It's called Burnt Offerings.
Oh, I love it.
What I do is I talk about how distracting barbecue has been to my spiritual journey, because every time I open the Bible and I read about burnt offerings, right, I think about barbecue. And then, like the whole story of the burning bush. Do you all ever wonder if it smelled like hickory or oak? Or the Valley of Dry Bones, did they look like spare ribs? I mean, do you think about that stuff? Maybe it's just me.
Oh my God, help us. I think we need a little prayer, Dr. Timothy Tyler.
I'm willing to offer it at this point.
I think we need something right now.
Maybe I just need spiritual counseling. Maybe
maybe just regular counseling, spiritual or not.
Adrian, I'm calling your pastor right after.
Oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that. I repent.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, you're an awesome person with all that you do, and I love that you're just getting so many kudos with the writing that you're doing.
Thank you, and I appreciate you all. And there's some questions. I'll answer them in the chat. I'm sorry I have to leave at noon, but I'll be here as long as I can. So
okay, and please, you're welcome to be part of the rest of the conversation. Appreciate it. Thank you. So now, without burnt offerings, I would like to introduce Reverend Dr. Timothy Tyler, who is pastor of Shorter AME Church in Denver, and Dr. Dwinita Mosley Tyler, who is the founder and chief catalyst for the Equity Project. We're really excited to have you both here to talk, to have an open conversation about reclaiming the conversation around race. So the floor is yours. And we had lots of questions that I had written down in the information I sent out, and you're in charge.
Awesome. Unmute yourself, Reverend Tyler.
Thank you.
I love saying that.
My wife always wants me to unmute myself.
Really?
Not really.
No.
I think so.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. We have been looking forward to this experience. And today we just wanted to begin by talking about the venture that we've been involved in since 2017 called Race Talk University. I see Roz down there. When you're in the Zoom space, she's like Brady Bunch. I see Roz and her square down there and others. And so we are privileged to have such great people who have experienced and been through Race Talk University. Before I get into that, I wanted to show you our little commercial about Race Talk University. I'm going to try to share it. And I'll probably do it in a way that my wife hates. That means you'll probably see everything on my computer, but I promise you, you'll get to the video. And so we'll.
So one of the places where I know for sure that we've gotten our definitions twisted is the words diversity.
We don't actually have, oh, here it comes.
My definition of inclusivity is it's what you do with your diversity. If you don't do anything with your diversity, you get to just say you're diverse.
We covered subjects such as slavery has not been that long ago, and the myths about racism.
And each discussion group will have 4 people who will volunteer.
Yeah, we didn't get visual yet on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Ready.
So one of the places where I know for sure that we've gotten our definitions twisted is the words diversity and the words inclusivity. My definition of inclusivity is it's what you do with your diversity. If you don't do anything with your diversity, you get to just say you're diverse.
We covered subjects such as slavery has not been that long ago, and the myths about racism.
And each discussion group will have 4 people who will volunteer to lead those discussions. So the first group will be America has never not been racist. Slavery wasn't that long ago. Myths about racism. You can't have inclusion without diversity. I'd like to have one expert for each envisioning session. Welcome to Race Talk University. We have had a magnificent time sharing and talking about race and white supremacy with 50 persons, diverse persons in our cohort.
I didn't go to school with anybody who wasn't Black.
And now we want to share what we've learned and what we've discovered with the entire Denver community. Saturday, May 11th from 9 a.m. to 12 noon at Shorter Community AME Church. We want you to come. Your life will never be the same.
All right. So that was just to kind of give you a little flavor about Race Talk University. Race Talk Universities became a thing in 2017, right after the Charlottesville, Virginia upheaval, when the white supremacists attacked the town, and we had friends who were there at the time, and I believe there was a murder that occurred during that insurrection, I'll call it. Dr. Nita and I decided that that race, because it was coming to the forefront of what was happening in our nation. I think the first taste we got of the seriousness of the problem occurred right after the election, when we woke up on that fateful day in November and realized that our nation had taken a turn for the worst. And so Charlottesville, I think, underscored that when the leader of our nation said that there were good people on both sides of what had happened. And so we decided that we wanted to create a forum in the space where we lived, where people would not only have an opportunity to talk about race, but also to talk about it in a way that we would take action, that we would have conversations filled with grace. And Dr. Nita's going to talk about that whole concept of conversations filled with grace, but we wanted to give people an opportunity to share. So we actually scheduled a race talk at the church that I pastor, Shorter Community AME Church. It was the perfect place. We thought Shorter Community AME Church is the oldest Black church in the state of Colorado, older than the state of Colorado. It is the home. We see our DNA as one of social justice. It has been involved in the heart of social justice in Denver since its beginnings. And we've prided ourselves in the last few years. We took on the name, we call ourselves the spiritual home of the resistance. And we are a community space. And so it's the perfect place, we thought, to have a conversation where there would be a diverse crowd, white people, people of color, Black people coming together to not only talk about it, but see if we can find solutions to working together to make our space a better place. And so on that first race talk that we had, it was in the evening, we were pleasantly surprised. We ended up with about 800 people in the space there to talk about race. And Dr. Anita and I put 2 stools up on the platform, and we just began our conversation. Now, just a side note, I was very happy that she was talking to me that night, because I think I did something to make her mad before the race talk started, and she stopped talking to me. But when we got up on the, she knows I'm telling the truth, but when we got up on the platform, Roz, she forgave me, so we were in good stead. So we had this conversation, and it lasted for about an hour and a half. And persons were able to respond to react and respond to this conversation about race. And we actually took our initial conversation and we broke it down into the what we thought were the important places that we landed in this conversation. And we created a whole curriculum. And so out of Race Talk was born Race Talk University. And so we've had about 5 or 6 cohorts now, where an average of anywhere from 50 at the lowest to 75 at the highest persons spend anywhere from 5 to 6 weeks talking about race, learning how to hold those conversations about race, and how to go back to their networks and to their friends and family and lead these conversations, and then talk about how we can create systems that are inclusive and not exclusive. I'm gonna stop here and ask Dr. Nita to talk about the whole concept of space filled with grace and how sort of the techniques that we use for those race talks.
Yeah, thank you. When I look back on starting Race Talk University, I don't know that we knew it would be a thing. What I do know is we were both very interested in just creating a space where people wouldn't have fear in talking about race. That's as much as we knew at that point. And the coining of the phrase "spaces filled with grace" is something that I wanted to see happen. We were already starting to divide deeply as a nation. We weren't being kind to each other in the process. There was justifiable anger on all levels, and yet we needed a space to be able to talk about this so that we would all have opportunities to go into action. A space filled with grace is this. It is a space where you're very direct about what you're talking about. So it doesn't mean you're going to tap dance around the major issues. We're going to talk about white supremacy. We're going to talk about racism. We'll talk about all the hard topics. You get to show up in a space filled with grace, wholly and fully who you are, unapologetically. You get to learn together and grow together. You get to screw up. You get to say, I don't even know what we're talking about. You get to show up as an expert maybe, or a scholar in something, but whatever that is, what you don't have to worry about is being personally judged or critiqued in the process. That's what a space filled with grace is. And so it has been a mandatory element of what we do in Race Talk University. It also is a mandatory element of how I actually do my work as a consultant around equity, inclusion, and diversity. And I think it matters a great deal. And even how we talk about race, if we don't center it in spaces filled with grace, it becomes optional for people to do something or to not do something. And so that's what we're trying to eradicate, is this opting in and out of doing something. So Spaces Filled with Grace works a great deal for that. One of the things I'll say about our journey with Race Talk University is the groups have been racially, ethnically diverse, which is a part of the power of the cohort. When you can put Black and brown and white people together talking about all of the intricacies of even having a conversation about race, it's powerful. And we have seen growth in not just white people who are learning how to talk about race, but even people of color who are learning how to talk about race. We've seen manifested in some of this too. You learn things in the process, like our systems and how all of our major systems in the US have systematized racism in them, and that these systems are tied together in such intricate ways. And to be able to explore that intricacy and to explore what would it look like if we took the inequities out of a system, what might we be experiencing in the world if we did that, and to do some deep work on that is an important part of Race Talk too. I wanted to share with you just really quickly a slide or two. And I want to start with this one because I think it is the impetus for Race Talk University. We acknowledge that there's not only a fear about talking about race, but there's actually a discomfort and a confusion about why we're centering on race and leading with race. And we saw this evidenced a lot last year where everything was centered on race. And so one of the central questions in our work is having people be able to answer this question: why are we centering on race? And why does it scare me to talk about it? And so we center our conversations on that. It's really not a trick question, and that's what we tell people. But to be able to answer that question is important at the individual level. Why are we centering? And why does it scare me? The other thing that we use as a framing, I wanted to make sure that you saw this today. It's a framing called liberatory consciousness. It's by one of my favorite researchers, Dr. Barbara Love. And what Dr. Love says is there is a rhythm to what we need to be doing right now. It can't just come from your passion. There's a rhythm about this. And what she says is we first have to acknowledge that we are all in oppressive systems. Our churches are oppressive. All of our systems are oppressive. We are in them. And what she says is we've got to work hard not to get socialized in those oppressive systems. Don't get used to it. What she wants us to do instead is to start working inside of the oppressive systems to eradicate oppression. So working on the system while you're in the system is what she's saying. And this is the framework that she uses, and we use it in Race Talk. And I just want to run through it really quickly. The first thing is awareness. And if you'll notice what she's saying here, she's saying, develop a capacity for noticing. It doesn't say be a scholar. It doesn't say be an expert. It says develop a capacity for noticing. So paying attention to what's around you, paying attention to what's not around you, what's being said, what's not being said, it's discernment. And so developing a capacity for that is an important part of this work. Then she says, go to analysis. And she talks about it being vital, but she also talks about it being the place where we get stuck. We want to study and assess and analyze, and we stay in there and we never come out. And so a part of the peril that we're in right now is we're so well studied and not action oriented. Then she says from our analysis, we go to accountability. This is the period where you start to define what your role is going to be. And we talk about this in Race Talk. What is your role? And what needs to happen next from your purview? What will you do? And then she takes you to number 4, action and allyship. And she puts those two words together. It is not enough to just be an ally, because that means in effect that you don't have to do anything. But when you put the word action with it, it gives you another edict there. And that is to be active in your allyship. And the last thing I'll say about this is you'll notice here in the diagram, she's got this little arrow going from number 1 to number 4. And she's saying, this is not the way. And she's right. What we tend to do is go from awareness, here's the problem, to action. That's what we do. We always want to jump right to fixing something. And what she's saying is that does not create the sustainable systems of equity that we're after. We're episodic in our way of solving issues. And so we talk about not jumping from 1 to 4 a lot in our work. So I wanted to share that with you just as some insight into how we frame Race Talk University. And it's been really helpful to have people explore in those different areas. Reverend Tim, any thoughts about that?
Yes, ma'am. I think that you are absolutely correct. And we Diana, we did get several questions, and I think that we'll hit on some of those questions. We won't be able to get all of them. But one of the questions, Dr. Nita, was your thoughts on the systemic racism in America. And I like that question because kind of based on what Dr. Nita was talking about, and actually the whole framework of Race Talk University is built on the premise that racism is systemic. That it is more complicated than just if people would act right, be right, do right, talk right, love each other, then racism would be over. But it's actually baked in, and it is baked into every system that we know, as Dr. Nita said, even in the religious system. The religious system actually plays a major role in racism as it relates to systemic racism in America. One of the books that we use for Race Talk, and also we were blessed to extend Race Talk University to Iliff Seminary. We're ending a class now there in Race Talk, and one of the books that we use is called White Too Long. And it is an excellent book that kind of traces the role of white evangelical Christianity in systemic racism. And so to answer that question, we do believe that it is systemic. And because it is systemic, it makes it very complicated. Right after the George Floyd murder, a young lady wrote to Webster's dictionary, and asked them if they would expand their definition of racism to make it more clear that racism is systemic and baked into the systems such as housing, transportation, health, and that people of color and Black people are at the lowest point of the systems because of the systemic racism involved. Webster wrote back to the young lady, who is from St. Louis, who is from Missouri, and told her that they would change the definition to make it clear that racism is systemic, and it does not matter number one, how people change their hearts. If the systems don't change, then racism will still exist. And it does not and this is one of the things we deal with in Race Talk University, is the issue of the face of the systems. Oftentimes white people get confused because they think that if the face is Black, then it must not be racist. So if it's a Black police officer involved in the abuse or the murder, then it must be a just arrest and not a racist one. But when you understand that racism is systemic, then the act is not judged by who participated in it, but it is judged by the rules, laws, and protocols that were created for that system. And so this is an excellent question. I'm gonna throw this one to Dr. Donita because she always handles the hard questions that come our way in Race Talk University. Dr. Donita said, it has been said that it's not Black people's job to educate white people on racism. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually think it's a collective job. I don't completely agree that it's not Black people's jobs. It can't be my sole responsibility to educate white people, but there is some beauty to the sharing of my Black stories and the sharing of your white stories and the intersection of those stories. I think it's collective work. I think this question is a good one because it begs what I think we don't talk about, and that is, what is it going to take to get this done? What is it going to take to advance racial equity? And my belief system is that it will take collective work, and we won't talk about that. But this is the area that we're tap dancing around. It's going to take all of us. And unlike other movements in history where we actually segregated a bit in the initiatives, this one is going to call for everyone. Justice is going to call for everyone. So I do think there's some teaching I will do. There's some learning I will do. There's some teaching you will do. There's some learning you will do. And if we can sit with that and be okay with that, it's great. I also want to just add a little bit to the conversation you just had about systemic and institutionalized racism, because I just want to give you a thing to work on. One of the reasons we don't get anywhere with this conversation about systemic racism is human beings don't want to go back to the past. It's ugly back there. Nobody wants to talk about slavery or Jim Crow era. People don't want to go back there. And so you get comments like, what does 400 years ago have to do with today? Or why do we have to keep talking about the past? Let's just move on. You get that. That flies in the face of our ability to advance racial equity. And I want you to know that's a thing, that people don't want to travel back. So I want to give you a way to think about this. I don't ask people to travel backwards. I actually bring the past forward. So I call it roll it forward. So you take things that happened historically and you roll them into 2021. For example, let me just give you an example. Poll taxes. Poll taxes historically were meant to disenfranchise Black voters from voting. They didn't have any money to vote at the polls. They couldn't vote. Mission accomplished. That's a historical fact. Now, if I ask you to take that historical fact and roll it forward to 2021, what do you see today that is evidence of poll taxes of the past? What's the residue, the residual, the tentacles from the past? And I bet you in seconds, each of you could think of some things that are evidence today that are connected to poll taxes of the past. I can go through every historical fact just like that. And in seconds, people can tell you what they're seeing today. It is one of the best ways to talk about systemic and institutionalized racism is by rolling it forward instead of trying to take people backwards. And so I wanted to share that with you. It's just another way to get people to understand what's in the system today, because that's the argument. If people can't obviously see it, then they will denounce that it exists in the system, and that's what we're facing into right now. So it's another good way to think about it.
Thank you.
What other? Yeah.
There's a question here. It says, what can one do when you feel the pain of history and present reality of our brothers and sisters of color? And I wanted to address that because that is a question that we address almost, it is a experiential way in which we address it at Race Talk. And the simple answer, I believe, is that white people have to learn how to sit in the pain that is in the room when it comes to Black people and people of color. Our response is always that when we experience the pain, we want to jump up and quote unquote, do something. Right after the George Floyd murder, white groups, white organizations began to throw money at Black ventures, and we've talked about that. And there is a place for supporting Black ventures and Black businesses and Black organizations and people of color. But before you can get up to support anything or anybody, you've got to sit, you've got to learn how to sit in the pain, and you've got to learn how to you've got to take responsibility for your role in causing the pain before you can fix the pain. One thing Dr. Nita said that we have a very diverse group of people involved in Race Talk University. And so sometimes there's a lot of tension that happens in the conversation, and we hear from many different sides. And there will be points in the conversation where the room is so heavy till there's no more talking, no more questions. We just sit in it for a moment. We feel it, we shed tears. I know I'm talking to a lot of people who have religious backgrounds. You all remember in the story of Job, where when Job was experiencing one of the heights of his sufferings, and his friends, before they started running their mouths, they came, and it said they just sat with him for 7 days. They just sat there. They didn't say a word. They just sat there with him in his pain. And so one of the things that we help white people to do, and others to do, we help everyone to do, is to sit in the room. And if you can experience the room, then you're prepared to go out and be a co-conspirator of helping to change the situation. And so I would say, for the question of what do you do, you have to learn how to sit in the pain, take responsibility for your role in the pain, and just learn how to listen and learn how to hear, and most of all, learn how to feel. In Race Talk, we often talk about this notion of one of the big topics that was born out of Race Talk was the whole issue of allyship, and what allyship looks like. And I know she's going to be mad at me, but I want to play. It's a very short talk that Dr. Juanita does. It's her TED Talk, and she talks about one of the subject matters that we deal with in Race Talk around the issue of allyship. And I'm going to do, again, what I don't do well is I'm going to share.
You can ask anyone you want, and they will tell you that they are sick and tired of fighting for justice. People of color and members of the LGBT community are tired of carrying the burden of speaking up and stepping up, even when they're being silenced and pushed back down. And white allies and cis allies are tired too. Tired of being told they're doing it wrong, or that it isn't even their place to show up at all. This fatigue is impacting all of us. And in fact, I believe we won't succeed until we approach justice in a new way. I grew up in the middle of the civil rights movement in the segregated South. As a 5-year-old girl, I was very interested in ballet. It seemed to be the 5-year-old girl thing to do in the 1960s. My mother took me to a ballet school. You know, the kind of school that had teachers that talked about your gifts and talents, knowing that you'd never be a ballerina. When we arrived, they said nicely that they did not accept Negroes. We got back in the car as if we were just leaving a grocery store that was out of orange juice. We said nothing, just drove to the next ballet school. They said, "We don't accept Negroes. Well, I was confused, and I asked my mother why they didn't want me. And she said, well, they're just not smart enough to accept you right now, and they don't know how excellent you are. Well, I didn't know what that meant. But I was sure it wasn't good, because I could see it in my mother's eyes. She was angry, and it looked like she was on the verge of tears. Well, I decided right then and right there that ballet was dumb. You know, I had lots of experiences like that along the way, but as I got older, I started to get angry. And not just angry at the outright racism and injustice, I was angry at people that stood by and didn't say anything. Like, why didn't the white parents in that ballet school say, that's wrong, let that little girl dance? Or why didn't the white patrons in the segregated restaurant say, hey, that's not right, let that family eat? Well, it didn't take me long to realize that racial injustice wasn't the only place that people in the majority were staying quiet. When I'd sit in church and hear some homophobic comment being disguised as something scriptural, I'd say, I'm sorry. Why aren't the heterosexual churchgoers disrupting this nonsense? Or, in a room filled with boomers and Gen Xers who started degrading their millennial colleagues as being spoiled, lazy, and overconfident, I'd say, I'm sorry. Why isn't someone my age saying, stop stereotyping? I was used to standing up on issues like this, but why wasn't everyone else? My fifth grade teacher, Mrs. McFarland, taught me that justice requires an accomplice. Not just anyone will do. She said we need unlikely allies if we want to see real change happen. And for those of us experiencing injustice up front, we need to be willing to accept the help. Because when we don't, change takes too long. I mean, think about founding father John Adams. And if he had not talked to Abigail Adams in 1776 when she pled with him to remember the ladies and to be more favorable to them than your ancestors were, we might not have gotten to the women's movement when we did. Or imagine if heterosexual and gay people had not come together under the banner of marriage equality. Or what if President Kennedy just wasn't interested in the civil rights movement? Most of our major movements in this country might have been delayed or even dead if it weren't for the presence of unlikely allies. When the same people speak up in the same ways they've always spoken up, the most we'll ever get are the same results over and over again. You know, allies often stand on the sidelines waiting to be called up. But what if unlikely allies led out in front of issues? Like, what if Black and Native American people stood in front of immigration issues? Or what if white people led the charge to end racism?
I'll stop right there, and that way you can go and find the TED Talk on your own. We're almost at 2 million viewers now, so you will help to get us where it needs to be. But the point is, but this is one of the conversations that we do have at Race Talk University. Someone asked the question, how do we not get overwhelmed, find hope, rise up, keep on keeping on, and dance in the face of this challenge? One of our speakers at Race Talk University was the Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, a good friend, a longtime friend of mine, who is now the first Black senator from Georgia, elected this year. And he at Race Talk University, he talks about how the birds fly and how there's a leader that leads the pack, and then when it gets tired, it goes to the back of the pack, and then another bird comes up. And so there is a cadence that takes place. And so as we talk about this issue of ally, as Dr. Duanita so ably talks about it, if we had this kind of behavior and if we had this kind of cadence going on in our society, then no one would have to get overwhelmed with what's happening, because we would all be working together on this situation. As we look at Race Talk University, we deal with this issue of cadence, because to tell the truth about it, Black people, many people of color are tired. My wife purchased a t-shirt for me, and it says exhausted. And at the bottom of that, it says Black folks. And so the goal of Race Talk University is to bring us all together so that we can create a space of grace that will give healing and rest from the exhaustion. And so that we can work together to find ways not to just tweak systems of racism, but to eventually destroy them and create systems that will not keep people out, but that will serve everyone. We do have a summer cohort coming up in June, and you can find that information at shortercommunityame.org/Race Talk University. Dr. Nina, maybe you can put that in the chat for me.
It's already in the chat. So
Thank you.
that's really helpful. You know, I want to add to something that you just said very quickly, and that's about what do we do with the exhaustion? Let me give you some context. I know this has been a long haul, and depending on our ages, we've been at it a long time, but I do want to be really honest. We're just at the beginning stages of equity work, racial equity work. We weren't doing racial equity work before about 2020. We were doing diversity work and inclusion work, and we dabbled in a little equality, but this is full throttle racial equity work. And the thing that makes that different than what we've been doing historically, things that we needed to do historically, is that racial equity work is about your systems. It's not about your heart, your mind, your feelings, who you are as a human being. It's about your systems. It is the interrogation of your systems and the commitment that you're making to dismantle anything that has inequity in it, in your system. So I guess the context I want to give us here is that we're really at the beginning of equity. And so for every time that you feel overburdened or disappointed or impatient, I want you to just always remember where we are in the continuum of things that we've been working on. We've spent a lot of time on diversity and inclusion. And in the 60s, we spent a lot of time on equality, but we really never got to equity. And here we are. So we may not see full equity in our lifetimes, but that's not going to stop me. And I don't think that's going to stop you. We do the part that we can do in this lifetime to craft what we want our future to look for our children and our grandchildren, and even those not associated with us. Really important to remember that.
So we invite you to come and join us. Someone asked the question about policing. What were our thoughts about I'm assuming it relates to defund the police or change the way in which policing is done. You'll get to raise that question and work on answering that at Race Talk University. In groups, we ask you to, first of all, identify the flaws in the system, and then we give you an opportunity. I think it took everyone by surprise. We handed them a bottle of glue, some scissors, some contact paper, and some magazines, and we said, now build a new system that looks like what it ought to look like. And as easy as that sounded, many people found it difficult. Even with glue, paper, and scissors, how do you rebuild these systems? But it was beneficial, and some good system rebuilding has come out of Race Talk University. And so we don't answer all the questions that you raise, but I think we try to teach you how to raise the right questions and then lead those conversations around those questions so that we can all work together to build better and more comprehensive systems. And so we thank you for the opportunity to just be here today and to talk about Race Talk University and to invite you to come and be a part of the conversation.
I really thank you so much, both of you, for all that you have done, all that you're making me, I want to do this. So I'm hoping other people will want to do this.
Good.
I'll put it out to our communities. I want to introduce right now Sonia Yeager Meeks up in the corner there, who is our Zoom master. And she's listed a lot of the information on the side. And also open up, we've got about 20 minutes. Are you guys okay with being on for a little longer? Other questions that people might want to have with you, a little conversation. And the other thing is, there are a couple of things you said for me. The issue of fear. I mean, when Dr. Timothy and I were speaking about these questions, I have to say, those of you that know me know I'm not usually afraid, but I felt really uncomfortable asking the questions. And so I love how you talked about that we have to sit in the fear. That's the other part of it, or sit in the pain. I don't know if Jana is still on the call, but she and I have been talking about a program, and it was literally that, where we hear the stories and we sit with it, because we do want to create something that will change, but I think we have to feel it deeply first. So I really appreciated that. There's so much of this that just sounds really exciting to me. So I'd like to open it up, and Sonia, if you can just deal with all the questions that may come up. You're on, people.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself. You'll usually find that button in the bottom part of your screen, though if you're on the iPad, it might be in the upper right. And also you can put a question in the chat if you'd prefer to do it that way. Yes. Let's unmute you. There we go.
I just figured out how to raise my hand in
Very
a couple
good.
of other Zoom sessions, and I'm pretty proud of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Bye-bye.
I really appreciate your comments, because I've been wanting to know more about Race Talk University, but then I got waylaid on different sites. I wondered about, there's so many questions I have. I'm assuming that you have talked about education within Race Talk University. And one of the things that I've been looking at is what's happening in Denver Public Schools curriculum as far as teaching African American history. And I didn't know if that was something that you covered in Race Talk University.
You know, it comes, it's a great question. It comes up in the section of Race Talk University where we're talking about reimagining systems. And I think in every single cohort, when it comes to the system of education, members of the cohort always talk about what needs to be in the curriculum. And they really explore that. So it does come up in the education group every single time. And making sure that not only is there Black history, but that it's complete Black history, right? Because you can have Black history and incomplete Black history. I lived in the South. We had Black history and it was incomplete, which is why I didn't know anything about Juneteenth until I got to Colorado. I'd never even heard of it. Wasn't a part of any of our history.
That is so amazing, because my husband and I come from the East Coast, and we had a good education, never heard of Tulsa.
Yeah.
And I was so embarrassed by that. Didn't know about Juneteenth either. We thought when we moved out to Colorado, we thought it was just African-American culture and art and music. Had no idea the connection. And then there was just something on, I think 60 Minutes, where a Black man from Tulsa grew up there and he knew nothing about Tulsa.
Right. That's exactly right. That's the fragmentation of our history. And we have to be real careful about that. I mean, we have some folks that really have their eye on complete history, because to employ fragmented history in our school system brings us the same outcomes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tag on. Oh, excuse me, Dr. Tyler, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Because I knew there were a group of Black students that in Martin Luther King early college that were trying to bring the 1619 curriculum into their school, working with the Urban Leadership Forum. And do you know anything about that?
I don't think it's been met with excitement. And again, it's because it is really complete history. And are we ready for that? Right? So that's what we're trying to dismantle, is this hesitancy to have the complete story told. Our children need to know it, but I think even as adults, we need to know it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
Beth McCoy has a question.
Well, it's not a question, but it's about Tulsa. I read an article today that after the massacre, the people in Greenwood built back up in the 20s and 30s. And then the powers that be decided to run a whole bunch of highways and interchanges through it. So they, they're still trying to destroy it.
Yeah. So Beth, what I love about what you're saying is you're doing what I talked about, rolling it forward. That is a roll it forward piece of history that's important for people to understand. The Tulsa massacre wasn't just way back then. It's still happening.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're describing. That's the power of rolling it forward. You just keep it relevant so people understand that's institutionalized.
That's right.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Another thing, in terms of rolling it forward, the issue of reparations. I would like to, if you have some comments about that, because people are looking at what can be done to bring a touch of justice for people who weren't able to buy their homes, have their land, get into universities. Healthcare. It goes on and on and on. What are your thoughts around the issue of reparations?
Yeah, well, I've got lots of thoughts about reparations. It's not a problematic endeavor. I think what makes it problematic is knowing where to start with it. And depending on where Black people were in this country, the lived experience was different. Those Black folks that were in the South had generational wealth absolutely disrupted that might have looked a little different than the disruption of wealth in other parts of the country. It's been really amazing to me, having grown up in the segregated South, being married to Timothy Tyler, who grew up on the West Coast. We had very different experiences. So the disruption might have looked differently. So I think to reconcile all of that, that's going to take a lot of brain trust. But we've got some good examples, like the Denver Black Reparations Council here in Denver. Harold Fields is instrumental in that work, that are at least trying to get the funds going. The operational and logistical things that will have to happen, I think, is going to take a lot of brain trust.
Yeah, and I think it's important as we look at the whole issue of reparations. Many people equate reparations with welfare. Reparations is not an issue that addresses where people are economically, and so it is not addressing the economic position of certain Black people, but it really addresses the terror and the harm that was done on an entire race of people wherever they were. economically. Systems even were as treacherous to Black people who were considered well off as it was to systems. Systems worked equally on everybody. And so I think people have to kind of get past the notion that reparations are welfare. And there are, as Dr. Duanita said, I think as we go forward, looking at reparations, we have to look at every single system and see where the dysfunctions were. And I believe we have to build our reparations within those systems, whether it's health, education, economic, so that across the board, we are changing systems, racist systems, by creating reparations that will hopefully one day, Dr. Donita says we've never seen it yet, but one day create an atmosphere of equity where everyone gets what they need to thrive and survive.
Do you think that how the USDA is addressing historic inequities with Black farmers might be a good model?
I absolutely do, and I'm very proud of my friend Senator Warnock, who sponsored and pushed that sort of a form of reparations for Black farmers. I think that is a perfect model because under the last administration, Black farms and farmers were almost wiped out and ignored. And so I think that is a perfect model for how we should handle reparations, and it creates equity. It gives Black farmers what they need so that they can be at least hopefully on par with where other farmers are. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, Friar. I love that you brought that up. There is already head banging on that issue because white farmers are now saying, what about us? We're struggling too. It's already happening. So again, I think it continues to put us in a position of how do we talk about this? How do we roll forward conversations on this? Because we want our white farmers to be okay too, but it is clear through those comments that they don't understand what has happened to Black farmers.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and there's a real difference between equity and equality.
Yes.
I mean, equality makes it sound like we're starting from a level place. Equity means we have to catch up. Mm-hmm. So that, I think that more needs to be talked about in terms of that difference. We don't understand the difference.
Correct.
Well, don't get Dr. Donita started because she'll be on it all day with that subject.
It's why I named my company the Equity Project, because I wanted it centered on that phenomenon that we have not really spent a lot of time on. And the more we keep talking about equality, the more we're ignoring what the disparities really are. Yeah, love that.
Can I say also that as we've been, that this cohort that just graduated from Race Talk University was our first virtual cohort. We were actually at the end of a cohort when the pandemic broke out. But it has been interesting. As you know, the pandemic shed light on not just COVID-19, but it shed light on the racist pandemic, the economic pandemic, the deficiencies in the systems. And so though our last cohort was virtual, it made for even more interesting conversation. And it also gave more light to this notion that systemic racism is the root of all racism. And so this next cohort will also be virtual. It probably will be the last virtual cohort, and then we'll be back in person, hopefully for the fall cohort.
Can you give a timing on when people, do they apply or do they just say, I want to do it? How does one become part of this?
The application is up on the two websites, Shorter website and drtimothytyler.com website. They're up now, and you can begin applying now. On June 1st, we'll have sort of a orientation video playing on in Zoom and on Facebook, and then the first session of the cohort will. So you can register up to the 5th of June, and then we will notify you about your registration, and then we actually start the course on the 7th of June.
Okay, and what is the cost?
There's no cost to Race Talk University right now. We've had some very generous grants come in from people like Kaiser and Colorado Health Foundation, and so we're able to, and also the Rose Community Foundation, and so we're able to offer this conversation at no cost.
Amazing. We're now at about 5 minutes before we're ready to end. I'm going to offer an opportunity for anyone else who'd like to make a comment, question. Anita?
Yes, thank you very much for being here, and this is very educational and enlightening, and I'm going to share your university with a number of people in my faith community. Thank you. I have been sharing in the chat about some of the work at Together Colorado, and I know that people from Shorter are very involved in this, and this House bill that is actually just about through on police reform and around show-ups, the practice show-ups, and that I think is a really good example to trying to work on systemic change. So I just want to lift that up because I know how much Shorter is instrumental in the passage of this bill as well. And thank you for that. And the part of the mutual education that has taken place that has gone together in that effort. And lastly, I'm just going to share a video of Sharon Battle and her family's situation with their son that led to so many people's getting involved because people were sharing their story. So thank you again for everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
So unless there's someone else that'd like to make a comment or a question, I will end this. And I am so grateful to you both and to Adrian for sharing your gifts, your passion, your heart, that you make such a difference in our community. It brings tears to my eyes and my heart. I hope that we will have Shorter AME as part of our chum community. I would like you to be part of us, whatever that looks like. We'll figure that out. We'll talk later.
Excellent.
And if you haven't seen it, yesterday, I can't remember her name, but she read Darnella Frazier's piece that Darnella is the young 17-year-old who videotaped George Floyd's murder. And she wrote a piece yesterday. And I really hope you can find it. And Sonia's doing such an amazing job with putting everything up. And we'll have this up, Sonia, right, on our website. And, you know, she said, right in front of my eyes, a few feet away, I didn't know this man from a can of paint, but I knew his life mattered. I knew that he was in pain. I knew that he was another Black man in danger with no power. I was only 17 at the time, just a normal day of me walking my 9-year-old cousin to the corner store, not even prepared for what I was about to see, not knowing my life was going to change on this exact day, in those exact moments, and it did. And it's 4 pages, and I ask you to just read it. It's very important. So I end with the last part of what I started with. We together need to breathe new life into our lifeless body politic. We need to be willing to breathe in fresh air to fill our hearts with the courage to tell the truth. This truth may open up space in our lungs and in our communities, in our institutions for deeper breathing, to help us find the courage to love, to transform, to heal, to find true freedom. With great love and respect, thank you both for being here. Thank you all for participating, and I look forward to other things that we do together. With great love.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.